are you now? Are you inside? Are you warm? Are you hungry? Thirsty? Chances are you can get up and move around to someplace a little more comfortable or find a tasty snack. Plants, however, can't just get up and move around to another location if they don't like where they are. They have to be able to tolerate whatever their environment throws at them, whether it's bad weather, poor soil conditions, or somebody chewing on their leaves. So how do plants adapt when they find themselves in a hostile environment? I'm Melissa, a PhD student in biophysics at Harvard, and I'm researching how some plants break a sweat to deal with extra salt. I'm going to tell you more about the fascinating plants that I study, but first, let's move somewhere a little more comfortable. We know plants basically need three main things: light from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air, and fresh water from the ground. Though there are many differences between plants and animals like us, we all need fresh water. And from industrial water treatment and desalination facilities to in-home filters, we as humans have done a lot of engineering to figure out how to purify our water from a lot of different pollutants. But plants have accomplished this well before us through evolution. And today we'll be talking specifically about how plants manage extra salts in their water supply. If we look through history, it turns out we've had a pretty good intuition for thousands of years that extra salt is pretty bad for plants. Back in the day, salting the earth was a ritual to curse the land so that it would become infertile and uninhabitable. One famous example is the Roman salting of the city of Carthage in the Third Punic War, where after razing the city to the ground, the Roman commander Scipio reportedly ordered the fields to be plowed and sown with salt, just to add insult to injury. Or might we say, to pour salt in the wound? Yeah. While we now know that this particular story turns out not to be true, this and other examples throughout history still show that we as a people have always known how damaging salt can be for plant life. So let's take a look at what actually happens when there's too much salt. Here I've cut 2 fresh, crisp slices of cucumber. One of them I'm going to leave alone, or what we'll call our control group. The other slice will be our experimental cucumber, and I'm going to give it some salt. After a few minutes, we see water being drawn out of the salted cucumber slice. We can see this effect more clearly if we use a paper towel to blot the surfaces. We see on the unsalted slice, only a little bit of water has escaped from the cut. Meanwhile, the salted cucumber has released a significant amount of water, and it completely soaks through the paper towel. And now if I pick up the slices, we can see that the salted one has gone completely floppy. When this happens, we say that this has lost its turgor. Turgor refers to the water pressure within the cell. If there's a lot of water, the cell membrane is pushed against the rigid cell wall, making the cell stiff, or turgid. As the cell loses water, the internal pressure decreases and the cell becomes limp, or flaccid. And these effects become quite noticeable when you put thousands of cells together into an entire plant. When there's not enough water, plants lose their turgor and wilt, which you can see very clearly if you've ever neglected to water your houseplants. How much water goes in or out of the cell depends on a lot of environmental factors. It could be dry air or dry soil that pulls water out of the cells, or it could be something like salt through a process known as osmosis, which is the movement of water from a more dilute solution to a more concentrated solution. Imagine a tank separated into 2 parts. On one side, there's a very dilute solution of salt and water, and on the other side, a more concentrated solution. There's a barrier between the 2 sections that allows water to pass through, but not salt. Now, even when a body of water is still, individual molecules are always moving, so there will always be water molecules passing through from one side to the other, in both directions. However, because the salt molecules carry a slight electrical charge, they like to hold on to the water molecules. Water molecules that pass from the dilute solution to the more concentrated solution will likely get trapped by the abundant salt molecules, making them unable to pass back through the barrier to the other side. On the other hand, water molecules that pass from the concentrated solution to the dilute solution are less likely to get grabbed by a salt molecule, so they can freely pass back. This asymmetry in the direction of water molecule movement leads to a net movement of bulk water towards the concentrated side. This dilutes the concentrated side and concentrates the dilute side until they are at the same concentration. So the likelihood of any traveling water molecule to get picked up by a salt molecule is the same on both sides of the barrier. And what we end up with is more water on the side that originally had more salt. This is what happened to our salted cucumber slice, and what happens more generally when plants are exposed to salt. If the roots are exposed to salty water, it becomes harder to overcome osmosis, making it more difficult for the plant to take up water. Similarly on the leaves, unless there is a protective waterproof covering called the cuticle, contact with the salty solution will dry out the leaves. So it's in the plant's best interest to avoid extra salt as much as it can. While our kidneys are specifically designed to filter out extra salts, plants generally do not have specialized excretory systems, so they are typically not well equipped to deal with extra salts that they don't need or want. However, just as plants have developed adaptations to all kinds of hostile environments, some of them have adapted to salty ones. These are called halophytes, or salt-tolerant plants. Now, there are a variety of strategies different plants use to manage their salt intake. Think of these mangrove trees on tropical coastlines. There's water everywhere, but not a drop to spare. These trees only have access to salt water, so they need to find a way to filter it out to get fresh water. One approach is to exclude salt at the roots to avoid having to process it inside their bodies, but this only really works if there's enough water flow around the roots to flush out the buildup of salts, like here on the coast. If they do take up salt through their roots, many plants, like red mangroves, redirect their salts into a few specific sacrificial leaves that eventually get shed. And other plants have developed smaller structures that either sequester or eliminate salt, and these are generally known as salt glands. There's a surprising diversity of salt glands, both in form and in function, from bladders that work as smaller versions of the sacrificial leaves to pumps that transport the salt outside onto the leaf surface. And this is what I study. Here we are in our greenhouse. These are black mangroves, or Avicennia germinans, which are native to subtropical coastlines. These ones came from southern Florida, and here in Massachusetts I'm growing them hydroponically, or without soil, in a solution that mimics seawater. This also means we get a great look at their root systems. Their leaves have salt glands that secrete salt onto their surfaces, and if we look at some of them, we can actually see the accumulation of salt. Want to see an even weirder plant? This is Nolana mollis, a shrub native to the Atacama Desert, or the driest desert on the planet. Water is a precious and limited resource, especially in its native desert habitat, yet this shrub is always covered in a wet, salty brine. So what's going on with this sweaty shrub? Nolana also has salt glands on its leaves that pump salt out onto the leaf surface in the form of a brine through cracks in the waxy cuticle. Because of these cracks, the brine is actually in direct contact with the cell wall. Now, thinking back to our previous discussion about osmosis, this is equivalent to the fresh, dilute cytoplasm of the cell in contact with the salty, concentrated brine across the barrier of the cell wall. We would expect this difference in concentrations to drive water out of the plant and into the brine, ultimately drying out the leaf, like what we saw with the cucumber. However, this isn't what happens, and Nolana mollis is actually doing quite fine. In fact, it's thriving. My research focuses on how the structure of this salt gland overcomes the power of osmosis using a mix of math, physics, and biology. So what does this scientific process actually look like for me? This project started sometime in the 80s when a group of researchers in the field noticed the salty brine on Nolana's leaves. Over the next few decades, we have been slowly gaining more information about Nolana, eventually getting some early images of what the salt gland actually looks like. These images then helped me build a conceptual and then a mathematical model of how the salt gland might actually work. So that means building and solving a bunch of equations and then writing some code. From this model, I got a hypothesis of what makes this salt gland function the way that it does. I then wanted to test this hypothesis, which led me into the greenhouses to grow some plants and perform some experiments, then into the lab to take some pictures of these structures. Here I'm doing cryoscanning electron microscopy, which involves flash freezing the samples to get high-resolution images of surface features. This project is now moving back to the field in the Atacama Desert in Chile, so I can get more measurements and samples, and all of that new information will then get fed back into my model. And I'll keep going with this process as I uncover more and more information about this fascinating system. Science is a slow, incremental, and cyclical process that builds off the work of others. And with each experiment and each project, we learn a little more about the world around us. But what are all of these small steps actually moving toward? With my research, I'm contributing to the body of knowledge about salt-tolerant plants, which has big implications for growing crops in poorer soils, or building devices inspired by these plants to desalinate water for human use. Maybe you haven't thought too much about how salt can affect plants before, but I hope now you can look around and think about how plants might find themselves stuck in salty situations. There are a lot of different ways extra salts can get into our soils, like when we de-ice the roads in the winter. So the next time you see them salting the roads, think about where that salt goes and how it affects your friendly neighborhood plants.